Okay, so in this tutorial, what we're going to talk about is a technique which is quite widespread in the post-production industry, which is the use of something called ambient occlusion. An ambient occlusion is a method by which we create shadows in a scene on a material, but at a material level rather than using lights themselves. An ambient occlusion actually creates its shadows by looking at the proximity of two surfaces to each other. Okay, solely a mental ray thing. So what I'll do is I'll click over here and I'll make sure I'm in mental ray. My common tab, let's just check, yes, I'm in mental ray, and I'll check that in my indirect illumination I'm just set to a low pass. I'm not going to worry too much about this at the moment. Okay, so that's good. So at the moment I think we've probably got, if I select both of those objects there and open up my materials editor, I think we've got just a standard material applied to those. We do indeed. And the way that we put ambient occlusion on is we have to first of all choose a mental ray material. Okay, so this is different from the architecture and design materials. It's different from anything else that you've seen actually, in fact, because it has no notion of a surface shader, has no notion of what a shadow is, it has no notion in fact of anything. It's just a blank container into which we add whatever we want. Now in this case I want to create a surface shader. Okay, so I'll click on none and I'll pick the one at the top, which is the ambient occlusion map, and there we go, ambient occlusion, and these are all our settings. Okay, so really there's only a couple that we want to worry about here, and the first one is going to be samples. That's set to 16. 16 is a bit low. It'll render quickly, but it's a bit low. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn those up to 64, just to make sure we've got a nice smooth result here. And then I'll very quickly just press render to see what my result is. And you can see that's rendering remarkably quickly. If we wait for it to go through, I'll just pause, in fact, just because you don't have to watch the rest of this. And there we go. Very quickly, very simply, very easily, we've got perfect shadows because they're all based on proximity for this object, and it looks really, really nice. We've still got a little bit of noise around here, but we can get rid of that quite easily. And the whites are a little bit white, so again, we'll look at getting rid of that. But yeah, so far, quite pleased. So back to my ambient occlusion settings, and you can see here we've got the brightest pure white. So maybe I'm going to tone that down a little bit, make it a little bit grayer, and make my blacks just a little bit lighter as well. As far as my samples are concerned, well, we'll try upping that to 128 to start with. I don't want to worry about the spread. Now the maximum distance, if you leave that at 0, it will work out things automatically. Okay, otherwise you are defining how far the spread of your shadows is going to be. So that's quite important. If you want sort of quite harsh shadows, which we generally don't with ambient occlusion, you can specify how far out the surfaces, the rays should trace from the surfaces to see if there's another surface there. If you leave it at 0, it'll just keep going and you get a good response from it, but it's not as sharp. The shadows aren't as sharp. However, using this technique, it's really just for like general shadows and stuff, so you don't want to be playing around with that too much. Obviously at this stage I don't want this to be reflective at all, and we've also got an option here where we can return the occlusion in alpha, so that can be useful if we're going to be putting this on top of some CG. We obviously want to composite it together, so that can be quite useful to return that to the alpha. Fall off, obviously if we increase that too far, what's going to happen is our shadows aren't going to work because it's tantamount to playing around with the maximum distance. We can include and exclude objects from this by changing the object ID value. Object IDs was something that we spoke about in the earlier on when we were going through the object properties. Yep. We can also say non-self-occluding object ID. So again, we can say if there's a particular set of objects that have got a particular object ID, we can tell them to not be included either. So some fairly simple controls there, nothing too spectacular. And really what they're going to do is just allow us to produce these really nice little renders that we've got here, And if I just press render again, we can see the result as it appears. Now this is the one where I've changed the white to be slightly grey and the dark to be a mid-tone grey. So we'll just have a look at the result we get from that in a moment, shall we? And there we go. You can see we're not getting so much burnout around here, and our shadows have become a little bit lighter. So in actual fact, this is actually really rather quite useful if we were going to do this. You can see we've got alpha in there. If we were going to do this to help our rendering, and we wanted to use this as an ambient occlusion material, really very, very useful. We're not sort of washing things out here, we're just giving a general idea of general lighting, and we've got shadows with that as well. So absolutely brilliant and extremely useful.